This is Pharma Forum web editor Nicole Raleigh reporting from ASCO 2025 in Chicago on the final day of the Congress. And with me this morning is Mark Wildgust, who is Vice President, Global Medical Affairs Oncology at Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine. Pleasure to speak with you, Mark.
Good morning there. Good to be with you.
So J&J has contributed more than 70 abstracts reflecting the depth of their oncology portfolio and commitment to redefining what's possible for a wide range of solid tumour and haematologic malignancies. So, Mark, let's talk about J&J's ambition to get in front of cancer on a global scale. Share with us more about that intention, if you will.
Yeah, Nicole, I think that here ASCO is really just this incredible moment for J&J. Every year we get that opportunity to share that new science, and as you said, right, many presentations here. But that idea of getting in front of cancer is really about trying to work towards eliminating cancer and giving patients more time and more hope. And actually right here on the last day of ASCO, some of the very most important data for J&J, and I think the medical community is getting presented, which is our CARTITUDE-1 data, long-term follow-up. And we see some amazing results in terms of a third of patients are still progression-free and alive after 5 years, after just one infusion. And that's a really great example of us really working towards getting in front of cancer for patients. Actually, at the same time, I'm kind of like split between which session I'm going to go to. We have the first presentation of data from our AMPLITUDE study, really continuing to reiterate what Johnson & Johnson has been doing in prostate cancer, which is really advancing the science. We're the first company to have a CYP17 inhibitor with Zytiga approved. We're the first company to see really that you can improve outcomes in hormone-sensitive setting with our LATITUDE study. And then we have really apalutamide, which has really become a mainstay for patients. But that AMPLITUDE data today is going to show that those patients with BRCA alterations, that we can almost double that progression-free survival by using a KICA, our combination pill of niraparib and Zytiga together. We can double that progression-free survival, really overcoming that poor prognostic outcomes for patients with BRCA. You know, beyond that, we have some other data that's building on our lung cancer portfolio. We have results from the Cocoon study that were presented here by a patient advocate. And that actually speaks to this kind of community embracement that we have all of the medical community. Just a couple months ago, we presented the European Lung Cancer Meeting data showing that Rybrevant plus Laspuze is now able to extend overall survival, significantly improving overall survival. We still haven't reached that median overall survival, and we're projected to see more than a 1-year improvement in OS, changing the biology and changing the outcomes. But the other piece too is that we presented the Cocoon data showing that a simple prophylactic regimen can significantly reduce adverse events. And Jill Feldman was here actually presenting the next set of data for Cocoon, showing that we could also improve quality of life for those patients too. So there's really just a plethora of data. But I think the other piece is that we're actually presenting multiple first-in-human results. First data from pasritamig just a couple of days ago, a highly selected antigen target, KLK2, as a T-cell redirector, showing really quite excellent efficacy, but also amazing safety. I think for J&J, who is really an innovator in bispecific antibodies, you know, we have been developing many over the years. And actually, pasritamig is our fourth that we have tried to develop in prostate cancer. It has one of the best safety profiles we have ever seen, with a CRS rate of 8%, all grade 1, which is essentially fever. All you need to do is take Tylenol for it. And we allow patients to get to a Q6-week schedule, and we have built this next generation immunotherapy as an outpatient molecule. And then our myeloma trispecific today, again, buried here at the end of the meeting, but for us, I think one of the most exciting pieces of data. We have been innovating in myeloma for 20 plus years, really advancing things. But one of those benefits of being a leader in immunotherapy and in the myeloma space really allows us to kind of bring all those expertise and those insights to build those next generation molecules. That's what we've done with our myeloma trispecific. It targets BCMA, it targets GPRC5D. We were the first company to have a BCMA bispecific. We're the first company to innovate and bring forward a GPRC5D antibody. But what we have done is we've actually redesigned this molecule with a better way to target BCMA, better way to target GPRC5D, a softer way to hold the T cell when we redirect it, which means that we actually have a better safety profile. But the efficacy looks really exquisite. what we see is in those patients with relapsed or refractory disease, we're seeing more than an 85% response rate. And in those patients who have never seen a GPRC5D or BCMA agent, 100% response rate. Patients get quickly into deep responses. And at this point, not one of those patients has progressed. So whether it's first in human data or phase 3s, we really think here at ASCO we'd be kind of advancing things. That is the way here at J&J we've been getting in front of cancer.
Thank you, Mark. A plethora of data indeed. I mean, gosh, it's wide-ranging, as I say. So let's come back now to the Cartitude data, Cartitude-1 and Cartitude-4. So we don't need reminding that we're at ASCO, final day, but I want to discuss those multiple myeloma updates. And it was new long-term data that was presented showing a single infusion of Carvykti delivered lasting remissions and time off treatment for patients with relapsed and refractory multiple myeloma. And you said earlier about time and hope and quality of life. Can you tell us about the data, please, Mark, and attest to how those are ameliorated for patients?
Yeah, Cartitude-1 was our first pivotal study for cilta-cel, 97 patients, and that's what gave us our first approval. And if you think back a few years, right, it's actually almost like 7 or 8 years ago that here at J&J, we actually saw the very first data for this construct from our partners, Legend. 100% response rate in heavily refractory patients. And quickly after that, we put in a collaboration agreement with them that we now develop Carvykti around the world. The Cartitude-1 study showed just quite remarkable response rate, almost 100% response rate, but that durability was really remarkable. Now, 5 years later, looking at that 5-year long-term follow-up, these are patients who've had a median of 5 prior lines of therapy. Before Carvykti, the median length of remission that we might expect in these patients would be a couple of months. Median survival for these patients, we were still counting in months. We weren't even into years, so around about 12 months. So what do we see now? Now we see a median PFS of 3 years, a median overall survival of beyond 5. But the piece here at ASCO that's really remarkable, to one infusion, you still have a third of patients who are progression-free at 5 years. Now, my good friend Sundar Jagannath at Mount Sinai, he has 12 of those patients. That's about a third of the patients. Actually, a third of his patients, right? 12 of those patients is about 36 patients at Mount Sinai. 12 of those patients are in that situation of being, progression-free and alive at 5 years. But he did something extra. He actually took a look and said, let's take a look in the blood. Let's see if we can find any myeloma cells. And the answer was he could not. And so actually 11 of those 12 were 10 to the minus 6, kind of really the most detailed way in which we can looking at myeloma cells. And one was at 10 to the minus 5, really at that detectable level. He also did something else and did PET-CT. And he said, I can't find any disease. So these patients have no evidence of disease in the blood. They're imaging negative and they're off therapy. I was just talking to him yesterday and he was telling me about 2 patients that just came back and had their 6th year visit. So to be off therapy, it's really quite remarkable. No therapy, no treatment. It's almost like we have really helped these patients go from hospice to potentially this idea that we have at J&J in the myeloma of getting towards cure. And I think that's what these data really signify. And I think it connects into the Cartitude-4 data as well.
Thank you, Mark. So let's shift now to updated results on Darzalex-based quadruplet regimes as a standard of care in patients with newly diagnosed multiple myeloma, if you will.
Yeah, I think, listen, we had the PROCEED study just approved just recently. It's a quad-based therapy followed by transplant, followed by Rep maintenance. And, what we've seen is a significant improvement in progression-free survival. Whether it is Perseus or Griffin, which are both quad-based therapies in patients who are fit for transplant, it is clear that when you add Dara to that standard of care BRD before, that we improve outcomes for those patients, both depth of response and progression-free survival. But the piece here that we really wanted to talk about from that Perseus study is we saw that about 50% of patients reached that minimal residual disease where you can't measure disease anymore, and they sustained that minimal residual disease for 2 years. And when you look at the progression-free survival for those patients, 99% of patients are progression-free and alive at 4 years. It's no longer a curve. It is literally a flat line with one little jot down. And it really is quite amazing. that speaks to this idea, right, that if you can use your best regimens first, get patients to deep responses, we can really transform outcomes. And that data, I think, kind of is reflective of that transformation that J&J has been able to make for patients with myeloma.
Thank you, Mark. Transformational indeed.
Yes.
So I've got a couple more questions. I'm not going to ask you about next week. So next week is the European Haematology Association, or EHA, Congress, and that will be non-stop from ASCO, which itself is non-stop. And there, Johnson & Johnson is going to present further data in chronic lymphocytic leukemia and real-world data from its federated data network on Earth. But as I say, that's under embargo. No can do. So we'll move on to my final questions.
Oh, you're holding me back, Nicole, because I want to talk about EHA next week, because as the #1 hematology company in the world, ASCO is definitely home. We'd love it they didn't put the data at the end of the week. But EHA is going to be all about our hematology portfolio next week. And we have some amazing data that we're going to be presenting from the Imbruvica team.
Well, I'm sure I'll hear about it.
I hope so.
Look into it further then. But let's stick with ASCO. What were your highlights, apart from what you've been sharing before now?
Yeah, I want to kind of come back, right? Maybe I can touch back on it again. You talked about getting in front of cancer. What does that mean for patients? At the end of the day, getting in front of cancer means giving them hope. And I think from a cumulative perspective, right, when you look at it, whether it is myeloma, whether it is prostate cancer, whether it is lung cancer, whether it is leukemia or lymphoma, I think that we continue to push the boundaries. At Johnson & Johnson, we don't follow the science. We lead the science. And I think that you can see here at ASCO that being reflective. Transforming outcomes in myeloma, seeing data that we have never seen before. That CARTITUDE-4 data, that is very similar to CARTITUDE-1. When we look at those patients in CARTITUDE-4, those are patients who have 1 to 3 prior lines of therapy. CARTITUDE-4 is the only study to have shown a survival benefit with an autologous CAR-T in multiple myeloma. But what we see when we look at that long-term data is about 65% of patients have what we would call standard risk disease, which means they don't have any soft tissue disease that's separated by itself, or what we call extramedullary disease. And they don't have those high-risk features, so like complicated cytogenetics. In those patients at 15 months, about 70% of patients, we see the PFS curve, it gets to 70% at 15 months, and then the line goes straight. That straight line, that to me is one of the highlights of ASCO. That's suggesting that those standard risk patients could have those same long-term durable missions that we've seen in CARTITUDE-1, but you're talking about more patients. You're talking about not a third, but maybe 3/4. And that, I think, really kind of speaks to the idea of getting in front of cancer and transforming outcomes. And if you think about it, I think straight lines are going to be my new favorite shape, whether it's Perseus, whether it is CARTITUDE-4, or CARTITUDE-1. I think it speaks to that idea that here at J&J that we're working towards eliminating cancer and hopefully taking steps towards cure.
Pushing boundaries, leading science, as you say, going towards cure. So final question, because it never ends. It's not just the end until perhaps one day that cure. If you could, Mark, solve one major problem in oncology over the next decade, what would it be?
I think that we have incredible medicines, but I think one of the most important things is continuing to try to get our medicines to patients where they're treated. I think that when you look at what we are doing now with our next generation molecules, take a look at pasritamig for a second, or our multiple myeloma trispecific. Those are next generation immunotherapies, and we're taking all the lessons that we have gleaned at J&J to not only build medicines that have really amazing safety and efficacy, but they are built for where the patients are. If we think about the United States for a second, 75 to 80% of patients get their care in community settings. We need to build medicines that are designed for where the patients are. With pasritamig, safety is key. The low rate of CRS means that those patients can be treated in an outpatient setting, and those studies are designed to be treated in an outpatient setting. Myeloma trispecific, designed for the community. 1 step-up dose, go straight to a monthly dosing, or even our patients go to every 2-month dosing as well. So we're not only building that next generation of innovative medicines, but we're building it with where the patients are and where the patients get treatment. And I'm going to come back to my good friend Jill Feldman. Jill Feldman presented that Cocoon PRO data this week. You talk about embracing the community and working with the community. For us, that means everyone from physicians to nurse practitioners, but also to patient advocates. And to have a patient advocate presenting data speaks to that way in which we work. But that is really about breaking down barriers to help get our medicines to where patients are being treated and to overcome those barriers. We need to work on approval, access, but also medical use. And that means helping make these medicines available, accessible, tolerable, and usable. That, I think, is where we can go beyond just innovating, but getting those medicines to the patients that need it.
A very apt point to end on. Thank you very much for your time today, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
So nice to talk to you today.